In this video, I'm going to go over the differences between the two models of 4K Apple TV. The original one, which was the A2169, is just built way, way better than the newest one, which is the A2843. From a performance standpoint, the units are radically different in ways that will affect high performance audio video use. So if you're wanting to get the very best picture and sound out of an Apple TV, you definitely want the A2169, which is the previous model. The newer model went through some type of a cost-cutting measure, which really cheapened it up. The cost went way down. The weight got a whole lot less, literally 1/2 the weight. There's less power consumption, which means that it's not doing as much. It's really quite a difference. And as I'll show as I go along, these differences were really profound if you want to use them for high-end audio video use. The units themselves are not even close in how they're designed, and we'll go over all of that. The Apple TV, the 2169, is really a remarkable piece of engineering. From a standpoint that's useful in high-end audio video, it's a truly remarkable design. How this works is, that's the main board that has everything on it. It has the processor, the HDMI, all of that stuff is on this one board. This one board then is sandwiched in between these really thick, solid metal plates. It then goes together where all of this gets sandwiched in a almost, well, basically an airtight, but certainly an RF tight environment. Notice these gaskets. These are RF gaskets that go around here that couple with this metal frame, so then that the metal, the outside of the box, and this all become an incredible, really, really thorough shield. Completely isolating each section of the Apple TV. The board itself also, on the inside of the board, has a metal sheet in it, a ground plane that isolates each side. So each section of a 2169 is amazingly isolated from each next section. This keeps RF noise, jitter, it keeps all of that from splashing over into each section. That's really an important feature for making sure that the HDMI and the Ethernet don't have any noise, and it really lowers jitter. It really creates a much better environment. Also, these thick metal pieces, once this has warmed up, acts as what's called it's a temperature controlled environment. What happens then is that all the parts inside here stay at a very, very exact temperature and don't drift. So this entire system is actually pretty remarkable in that it's incredibly low drift, very, very low RF noise. It's just an incredible design. Normally you see all this gasket work and this type of stuff in RF test equipment, so in stuff that's really high end. So this type of work it really shows that Apple really, really knows what they're doing. And really, on the 2169, produced the very best streaming device ever made. There's all sorts of aspects, and I'll go over each one. For example, the Ethernet, when it comes in, is obviously completely shielded because of the metal, and because of the gasket here from everything. And then it's transformer isolated in order to be able to make it really, complete. So that's really a good design. The power supply comes in through 2 pins, which are bolts that connect directly to the power supply on the main unit. the power supply is isolated from the main board by a 1/4 inch of solid metal, which means that the RF, all this noise from this switching power supply, doesn't get to any of the circuits on the main board at all. There's just no transmission in there at all. What does come through comes through this little area where it connects, where it bolts the power to the unit, which is quite substantial. The power supply in the original 2169 is really pretty much just garbage, and should be replaced with a linear power supply and a bunch of other improvements. But the base design of this separates the power supply completely from the main board. So this is a really important feature. Now, what also happens is on the board is, in order to hook up to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth for the remote and things like that, there are 4 connectors that connect to a bunch of antennas that are inside the top of the case. Each one of these connectors goes to an antenna. Each antenna on the inside is right in here. So they're on all 4 corners, which is really an ideal arrangement. These are very well engineered and designed to do one thing, and that's Wi-Fi. So, so this is really a great design, because they're on the very corners of the unit. On the inside of the box, what happens is this big plate of metal then sits in here and isolates all of this Wi-Fi, this high power radiated Wi-Fi energy, from getting into the main board. So none of the Wi-Fi ends up anywhere in any of the circuits, because it's kept away from it by a big metal plate. Also, the big metal plate acts as, you can see these cavities here on the edges, acts as a Wi-Fi resonant area, which is really a great design for doing Wi-Fi. So this, from a Wi-Fi standpoint, this is a really tremendous design. Really great all the way around. It's really a startling piece of engineering, because it's really well engineered. I believe only Apple could do this because of their sheer scale of doing phones, and the massive engineering capabilities they have that are present. Some of the other things here that are really impressive too is that the way that it develops its HDMI is using some really high-end chips to do that. Also, the clock chip that is used for generating the HDMI is a high-end product. The clock chip for the CPU is a high-end product. These are all low stability or high stability, low phase noise clocks. Everything on the 2169 is startlingly good parts quality and overall design. So the 2169 is really a remarkable piece of equipment. That's why it's a really good unit to use for audio video streaming. It most likely is going to end up over, as we go on in years, as the very best audio video streaming device ever made, because they're not going to go from what they did with cheapening to a better unit. And nobody can ever reach this level of sophistication of putting all this together in this way, other than Apple, because they're just really good at this, and nobody's crazy enough to make one this high end and go through all of this engineering to do this. So more than likely, this is going to end up being the best streaming device ever made. Of course, I wanted the new one to be better. Well, that is not at all what happened. So right away, the specifications frightened me because it was half the weight, and there was just a bunch of things that were astray just from the specifications. So what they did was they completely eliminated the metal. The metal is gone. What they also did was they took out the small fan, which, as anyone who knows who has an Apple TV, these don't make any noise whatsoever. So they removed its ability to use a lot of power. So by taking out the metal and taking out the fan, the unit must then run at a lower power in order to not burn up. So they addressed that. The metal was a bunch of machining. This is a whole bunch of machining that has to go on, whole bunch of a different kind of assembly, a whole bunch of extra work. The fan's a whole separate piece of equipment. There's a lot going on with all of this that makes it expensive to manufacture. So the best way to handle this to make it much cheaper is to just remove it, just eliminate it. To do that, what they did was they ran the CPU to much lower power, ran it in low power mode. What they did was they still had to have some kind of heat sinking. So what they did was they put a piece of metal that's permanently bolted into the top of this that's really cheap metal and quite thin. And they also didn't heat sink as many pieces. So they made sure that the pieces that they used were low power and didn't require as much juice in order to run them. So some of the major things that the biggest major, just terrible thing that they did, this is the power supply. And how this works, when I first saw it, I was horrified. So the HDMI chips and the chips that really count are under this piece of plastic, which is just stuck onto this stuff here. The power supply bolts directly to this without any metal shielding between the two at all. So what happens is this transformer generates an enormous amount of RF energy along with a bunch of these parts. All of this stuff creates EMI, which radiates into the other devices because it's high energy and it's really close. So without a piece of real metal between these chips that are underneath here and this stuff that's in here, what occurs is you get a whole bunch of radiated energy that ends up on the signals. I have actually used spectrum analyzer equipment, looked at all of this, and you can see the power supply on the HDMI output. You can also see it on the Ethernet. So this is a really horrible design from a performance standpoint because it just puts it just directly on top of all those chips. I've actually measured the RF from this getting all the way out to about an inch away from the other side of the board. So it's permeating the entire board and coming out the other side. So this is just a horrendous step backwards as far as performance goes. For, a lot of people, it's not going to really matter. They don't really have it hooked up to a good system. But for everybody who has these systems hooked to a high-end gear, this will matter. The next things that are just really obvious is wow, where's the Wi-Fi? Well, what they did was, in each part of these boards, on the same board, in these corners, they put the Wi-Fi right on the main board. So now what occurs, and you can see the holes for it here, and so now what occurs is the RF from the Wi-Fi actually radiates back into the main board because it's all part of the same board. So what happens, this is a really kind of horrific design for this. I mean, it works, but again, I can see the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz carriers from the Wi-Fi on the HDMI signal and on the Ethernet signal. So it's radiating into all of this, causing a bunch of RF-induced noise and a bunch of jitter and a whole bunch of things. So, and then that's just a bad design too, because all the RF and noise and energy coming in from the power line, from this bad power supply design, to have it be right next to the Wi-Fi is also not a good thing too, because this is going to couple with all of that, and you're going to end up with a lot of noise on the incoming Wi-Fi signals. So that's just that's a pretty awful sort of design as well. Now we start looking at other things. We start looking at things like how they did the Ethernet. Well, the Ethernet here can radiate all of the energy going on with the Ethernet and pick up energy going on from all of this, from the whole section, unlike the other board where it's just physically separated. Here what we have is we've got it actually really coupled because it's connected to this whole spot that pushes against the metal. So really all the Ethernet, all the noise in this section actually ends up on the Ethernet connector, and that's why I mean on the HDMI connector. That's why I can measure all this noise on here, because there's not a really good isolation of all of that. So that's kind of a mess. The Ethernet is isolated from the other sections, but again, it's got Wi-Fi right here and Wi-Fi right here, so it's definitely a problem for all of that. Let's see, so other things. This shielding that they're using is basically just a piece of plastic with a screen below it. It filters out. It's going to make it compliant for FCC. So this isn't designed to keep noise out. This is designed to keep noise in. So this is designed to reflect all the energy back into it without radiating out, so it can pass FCC regulations. So that's what that's about. And really what that does is that just generates more noise, then just permeates other stuff and pops out the other side. So that's all quite a mess. There's so many different things. I've tried feeling it linear power, and that didn't make any difference, because there's all these other issues that are going on that are affecting things. The quality of the parts. So the clock chips are one step down in the actual phase noise specifications and the quality specifications. These clock chips are not as good as the ones. The way they develop HDMI is using a chipset that isn't as good. It's low power. Everything in this device is designed for low power use, like you would from a phone or some type of portable device. So this entire thing is designed for low power because they don't have the heat sink in order to be able to radiate the energy from high quality, high power devices. So they, of course, spin this as, oh, it's more economical. Well, the 2169 draws like, $20 a year in power if you stream continuously. So I don't think it's going to matter to make it more economical. Anyway, so yeah, all of those things right there alone were just really kind of startling. Yes, they have an SSD that's got more room. Yes, okay, they've got HDR Plus, which really is only going to affect Samsung users, which I would argue really may not make any difference whatsoever in picture quality. Anyone using like a Sony OLED or any of the like Sony laser projectors, or any of the the LGs, and the JVC projectors, all those people that are using high-end displays, there's literally no performance enhancements at all in features that come with this. This has no reason to go to it from the 2169. The 2169 has all of the features. If this had like maybe 8K, or this had some other additional features, then maybe it might be worth it. But it has no features that are going to make it compelling to put into any of these high-end systems. What you really want is you want the low jitter on the HDMI. You want the really clean input from the Ethernet. You want the high stability clocks. You want the low phase noise clocks. You want all of the things that the 2169 has that the newest one, the 2843, does not. So this was a big step back in doing high performance work with an Apple TV. I have no interest in dealing with the 2843. I have played with it extensively with test equipment, with mods, with just a huge range of things, and I can't help it. It's just not going to work. So the 2169 is still going to be the product that really, it's probably going to end up being the best streaming device ever made. Is probably where this is going to end up, because it's way better than the Roku, way better than the other competing products. The engineering is startling, with these thick metal plates this airtight, these RF gaskets, the isolation, the thermal stability stuff, the way it has almost no real radiated noise. Once you get rid of the power supply, you use a linear power supply, it has almost no radiated noise that you can even measure with Ethernet or from the HDMI. The jitter is incredibly low. The 2169 is just a way, way, way better product than the 2843. So I'm not going to be fooling with the 2843 at all. I'm just done with that. The 2843 was designed for Apple to get sales that are getting escaped over to Roku, I guess, all the people that are buying inexpensive devices. It's also, designed for, because of the chip shortages, they needed to redesign it anyway, and they were going to a new CPU chip anyway, so they didn't really have any choice but to redesign it, and they used the opportunity to make it much cheaper, much more profitable for them in order to push it into the market. Because, to be honest, Apple's just not really they don't make a lot of money. They don't have a lot of reason to make these devices because they're after streaming, they're after iPads, they're after, the TVs with all of it built in. So, these devices for them are low priority, which is why they did what they did here. The 2169 was back when, this was the statement piece for Apple for streaming. This was going to be a hub. This is going to be a lot of things. So there's a lot of good engineering in this, a lot of good expensive parts. Someone decided, okay, we're done with that entire concept. It's dead, Jim. We're not going down this path of high performance anymore. Let's just be cheap. And who knows, probably eventually, as many people have speculated, they'll just go to a USB stick, like a Fire Stick, and maybe not even make these devices anymore anyway. So I think we see that in where this is going. So I think that the 2169 is the statement piece. I'm going to continue to focus on the 2169 as it goes. Everybody's still going to be able to buy these used. I think what's going to happen is as we go along, there's still a lot of brand new ones out there, which I have a big stock of, but there's a lot of people that are going to end up, this is probably going to end up being a piece of gear that's going to be very sought after. So I think that right now, sure, okay, yeah, they're kind of interchangeable, you can get them everywhere, but that's probably not going to last. We're probably going to see these go away as everybody figures this out, and all the high-end guys really realize that this is the platform if you want to hear really good sound out of your system and a really great picture. This is the way to go. That everything else isn't even close. Anyway, that's just some of the things that I've really gone over with this. I just did overviews. I've done a tremendous amount of measurements, a tremendous amount of in-depth engineering on all of this. There's just no way I can make the 2843 anything other than what it is. So that's sad, actually. I would have loved for them to have come up with a new one that had, really great performance. I could have, done a bunch of stuff with it, and I could have sold a whole bunch of those as new, but no. They are absolutely just a huge disappointment as far as high-end audio video performance. For Apple, I'm sure it's great because they can sell a whole bunch more of them at the cheaper price. And for most people, these will probably look and sound about the same. If you're using a sound bar and you're using, a TV you've bought inexpensively, then these are probably interchangeable. But if you've dropped, a huge amount of money on your AV system and you're really going for that very last little bit of performance, then these two are not anywhere near the same device. The 2169 is just a way better device.